Welcome to the Urban Complex, a system of interrelated, emotion-charged ideas, feelings, memories, and impulses. This name takes the definition and lays out what a listener should expect. A podcast where ideas, feelings, and memories collide, leading towards meaningful change. I'm co-host Chris Richardson. Please enjoy the journey with the Urban Complex. Smarter cities for a stronger tomorrow.
All opinions by Chris Richardson, Dominic Papa, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Arizona State University or the Arizona Commerce Authority. Any endorsement of or messages from sponsors are solely supporting the production of this podcast. There is no relationship further than podcast purposes with any sponsor unless separately created with another entity.
What's up, Chris? Here we go.
Hey, Dom.
Another week. How are you, man?
I'm great, thanks. I got my second vaccination. I had a little rough week in that regard. I'm glad we weren't doing this earlier in the week, but boy, I'm feeling great now. Sun's out. But hey, I see you kind of bobbing your head around. What's going on?
You know, I've got to say, I'm pretty impressed. I know you took it on, to develop the new intro music for our show, and I'm loving it, man. Gotta
get some urban beat to our intro.
Exactly. Right? I was saying, it reminds me back in college studying abroad in Europe, and I dig it, man. It gets me pumped up, ready to go, ready to bring on some guests and talk smart cities. This is phenomenal.
Yeah, hope the audience likes it. Yeah.
There's some feedback.
So back to what's that?
I said hopefully they give us some feedback and we can see if they like it. I love it.
Well, so back to guests. You got a great one today. Tell us about Grant.
Yeah, Grant's phenomenal. Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Pittsburgh. We actually got to meet each other through Jessie Feller and the Meeting of the Minds. When the pandemic hit, they used to hold an annual Meeting of the Minds conference. We hosted it in Phoenix last year. But since we can't all get together, she started to have these small executive cohorts where she would bring thought leaders from different cities, different sectors, different industries, all together in a very, very small executive level cohort. And I got to meet Grant, and you'll see he's a tremendous leader, a lot of fun. Everyone's going to really enjoy listening to Grant and his experience and kind of the work he's leading in Pittsburgh. And kind of, to be cheesy, I've been watching what they've been doing very, very closely, especially with the intersection of kind of economic development and resiliency or sustainability, right? How they're not, mutually exclusive. You can actually bring these two strategies together to really help, set your city up, not only to be sustainable and resilient, but also to drive economic development. So I think you're going to love Grant.
Cool. It's funny. Jessie called out that one of our last guests, Emily, was also in a cohort too. So now we know where you're finding all the guests you're getting.
I love it because it's just a perfect way to meet each other, to develop the relationships. As I think we've seen from all of our guests up to now, these relationships are so critical. We're all in this fight together, right? The challenges I'm facing in Phoenix or in Arizona, Grant's facing in Pittsburgh. So I think we're going to see that kind of camaraderie here today. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and higher education, the industry. My day job, we do that all the time, and it's a strategic advantage. It helps the industry move along together. It's great to see this is happening to the municipality world as well. You asked me earlier what I knew about Pittsburgh. It's funny, my mom was actually born there. I haven't really visited a bunch, but I do know there's something special going on there. In my world in tech, there's a revitalization of the tech scene out there, some great news, lots of times with companies, also with universities. I know there's a big presence there, but I don't know Grant. So what do you think? Should we get him on?
Let's do it. You're going to love him. Here we go. All right, Grant, welcome to the Urban Complex. Thanks for joining us today.
It's nice to be with you guys. Nice to see you, Dom, and Chris. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on. The kind of the background and the purpose of this podcast is to really highlight, leadership stories of people around the country that are really kind of rolling up their sleeves and getting the jobs done and making a positive impact for the communities. So, Grant, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background, kind of where you came from and how you got to where you are today as the, Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Pittsburgh. I think we're going to dive a little bit deper into what you're doing, in day to day. So please give us, give us your story.
Well, I just rolled up my sleeves, so I'm ready to go here. A little bit of background about me, I guess. Prior to coming to the city of Pittsburgh, I worked for a few years with an organization called the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group. After grad school at the University of Pittsburgh and undergrad at Washington Jefferson College, which is a small liberal arts school about half hour south of Pittsburgh, I joined PCRG as a community organizer and a policy manager. So working with public policy issues as it pertains to community development corporations. So really kind of, grassroots in the community, kind of learning folks' challenges each and every day and how to use public policy to kind of improve community and people's lives effectively. After that, I spent a good bit of time in an organization called 10,000 Friends of Pennsylvania, which serves as Pennsylvania's statewide sustainable development organization. Everybody asked me why 10,000 friends. It was like Pennsylvania's a tough place, so we figured we needed 10,000. Other states have 1,000 friends in Maryland, 1,000 friends of Oregon, but we needed to kind of up the ante a little bit in the state of PA here.
Love it. How to one up them.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tough crowd up here. And then from that, I was asked to join Mayor Peduto's team back in 2014. I guess it would have been, and started as the city's first sustainability manager, and then kind of helped shape and craft the role of Chief Resilience Officer, which came as a result of our engagement with the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities initiative. And so I've been in that post. And then for those folks listening in local government, they know if you do a good job, they just add extra titles and don't give you more money. So I am also the assistant director in our department of city planning. So kind of two hats that I wear there in terms of the resilience officer and sustainability role, but also working to intersect kind of a lot of that work into the day-to-day operations of urban planning. And so that gives me kind of enough to fill out my week usually.
Congrats on that promotion.
Thanks. It's actually, all seriousness, it's kind of a fun intersection because a lot of the work that we do, whether it's in sustainability or resilience or in the smart city space, really happens in planning departments and understanding kind of the development cycle, how and when decisions are going to get made. And so we're trying to, really craft this kind of initiative here in the States, being on the frontier of understanding how we intersect these changes that we're looking to fundamentally make to urban systems. How do you do that? And a planning department's a great place to do it.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue, Grant, because a lot of our listeners are local government officials, city managers, CIOs, chief sustainability officers. But so I would love to kind of unpack that position a little bit, because as I'm working with cities all across the country, a lot of them are now starting to really look at this idea of the chief resilience officer position, right? I honestly don't think we have one. We have a chief sustainability officer with the city of Phoenix, but I don't think we have a chief resilience officer anywhere in our state yet, but it's one that city managers are actively looking at. So I would love to kind of unpack a little bit about the position, kind of in a structural sense. So, when did the city create the position, and what were some of the motivating factors and reasons for its creation? Again, it's one of the biggest words on top of cities' minds today. And so any advice for other cities looking to develop a similar position?
Sure. So just the genesis of the position, I saw an interview with my boss, Mayor Peduto, and somebody asked him, the similar question. He said, I never thought about having a chief resilience officer when I was running for mayor, whenever he was on city council. The idea and the concept of the position for us, the genesis was really as part of the participation in the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities initiative. And in the 100 RC program, there was really kind of four main pillars. That as being a recipient of the grant, you had to establish a chief resilience officer position. You have what's called a planning partner who is helping to build your strategy. There's the third offering is that there's a network that we called platform partners, which are kind of NGOs or for-profit organizations that are providing services or technology to a city. And then the fourth component was the network of cities. So this kind of cross-pollination between cities and sharing and learning between us. But the central component was the CRO, the Chief Resilience Officer. And the function of the CRO is a little bit different, I would say, in each city, depending upon what their needs are and the genesis of the program within their own operating platform. But the idea is that you have somebody who is at a senior level within local government and has the ability to be an integrator. One of the principal concepts of resilience is this idea of networking, right? And that if you can create network systems, that you're ultimately building resilience. And so my role in the city of Pittsburgh, I had already been in the position of the sustainability director, and many folks in the sustainability space know that sometimes you feel like a bit of a nomad because you're always, going from department to department to do this or that, or build connections or elicit support for something. So I was already in that position of having the ability to connect with multiple parties. And when the chief resilience position became available, what we really understood quickly is that in order to build out what we call in the Rockefeller program, the urban systems management, or the practice of urban systems management, that you need an integrator. And so my role is really about working within city government and across our departments, so creating cross-departmental collaboration, as well as outside of city government, creating cross-sector collaboration. So depending upon kind of what the issue is or the topic du jour, a lot of what my job is start to bring together those parties together in order to achieve the aims that we set out within our strategies that we've developed.
Now, Grant, how has that been? Can you talk a little bit about the difference, or maybe the different skill sets that are necessary to, one, be the integrator internally, right? Talking between different departments, and two, being the integrator externally? Because what I found is they're almost completely different languages, right? The corporate, the industry side of the world speaks completely different than internal department to department language.
Yeah, language is huge. I think you have to be able to speak those languages and be pretty fluent in them. So whether you're talking with the Office of Management and Budget, or the Department of Public Works, or the provost at the University of Pittsburgh, you have to understand kind of their world, their operating environment, what their aims are that they're trying to achieve, and effectively what you're trying to do to work with them. And so, that's one of the key things. I think also another kind of principle of resilience is the ability to be adaptive or adaptable and reflexive, right? And so internally, one of the challenges I would have is switching your mind. So internally, in many cases, you're working on the direct implementation of a city service, so you're literally kind of on the field, in the middle of the play. If you're dealing externally, a lot of times you're up in the press box and you're trying to figure out, which direction the play is going to move, and you're helping to develop strategy or coordinate functions. And so, that requires the ability for you to be reflexive and be able to switch gears. But understanding that terminology, to your point, is really critical. If you don't understand the challenges of, say, the Public Works Department and what they're up against, it's very difficult in order for you to get to implementation.
Exactly. Wow.
Interesting. We normally ask guests what their view of smart cities are and what is a smart city. So feel free to answer that if you'd like. We definitely wanted to see from your view what the intersection of the resilience efforts that you just mentioned, your kind of role, and smart cities. So I know it's kind of complex, but tell us a little bit about where they intersect, and if you want to define smart cities, feel free. We'd love to finally get someone to get the real answer.
No pressure.
It's interesting because my introduction to smart cities was really in 2016, the U.S. Department of Transportation had initiated what they called the Smart Cities Challenge. And like all cities, we're competitive, and you're trying to get the resources that you don't have. And so the process itself, I think, was really fascinating in terms of the team building that was required, the introspective kind of nature, the investigations that we had to do in order to build a strategy. And so I was one of the key team members in developing the Pittsburgh strategy, what we called Smart PGH. And, so that it was a fascinating process. And I think, like a lot of the large strategies that I helped oversee, both our climate challenge, or climate plan rather, and our 100 Resilient Cities Resilience Strategy, which is known as 1PGH, we saw the same type of evolution, which is you're given a challenge by an external factor, external organization, in this case, like the DOT. And in many cases, you are being requested to focus in on hard infrastructure, a technology, if you will. In that case, it was, it's mobility solutions. And inside of mobility solutions, and this is how I got involved in it, we start to investigate energy systems. And so the integration of energy systems and mobility solutions. But then, about a quarter of the way through the process, we start understanding that the ICT networks of the city are key critical components of this. So you can see like this additive nature, right? And what was fascinating about that, because of the scale of the challenge and the attention that it brought, there was a huge inundation from industry. Everybody was, in kind of, not everybody in kind of our circles, right? In our little bubble of the world, we're talking about this activity. And so we were receiving proposals from industry, like, here, we've written it for you. Here you go. You guys don't have to do a thing. We already wrote it for you. We have a staff of 50 people here at HQ, and they've developed it. Just sign here and it's fine. And, the first, just like any type of shiny technology, I think people get enamored by that. It elicits a lot of interest. But about midway through the development of the process, we took a step back because, that gets a bit overwhelming, I think, for local government folks in particular. And yet at the same time, it's also personally endearing because people were taking interest in you, right? Most folks don't take much interest in local government services. It's just things that, by and large, I'd say probably 95% of the population take for granted unless something doesn't go right. And it was halfway through that process that what we realized was that a smart city is none of those things. A smart city is really about how do you provide the services that your people, the residents, the businesses, the humans that kind of make up the chemistry of your city, right? It's really about them. And how do you provide services and maybe leverage a technology to improve the services and the well-being of those folks? And that's what a smart city really is. It's about a city that can provide the services that improve the health, safety, and welfare of its residents. Yeah. And that could require a variety of different layers of technologies and services on top of it. And so, excuse me, as we developed that, it really shifted our mindset in terms of why we were trying to do the things that we were trying to do. And so, there was a lot of lessons learned in that. And fundamentally, the other piece for us was it then also allowed us to start to intersect a number of different strategies that we were trying to achieve or work on in other areas. So, issues of like inclusion and social equity, health, I had mentioned. And so how do you start to bring those ideas to bear within the deployment of a technology or a deployment of an infrastructure process. So really starting with kind of that people-based approach first was the mind shift that we saw and the evolution that we had.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that. I think that's such a mature approach, because too often, cities stumble into that chasing the shiny object, or, a mayor goes to a conference and sees a demo, comes back and thinks that's, going to make his or her city smart. But this idea of putting the people in the center, it's incredibly important. And I just love kind of that approach. And then I love what you just mentioned at the very end, is how you took that approach as you took a step back and developed that approach of putting the people in the center. But then you use that framework to then go at and like kind of adopt it with other programs that were already underway, right? Let's take this people-centric approach and do it to this already existing inclusion project, or, a public works project, whatever it may be. I love that idea of taking the framework and then, distributing it out across the city. It's phenomenal.
So is smart cities a thing for the city of Pittsburgh? Or is it more the resiliency mindset that's come out of what you were learning from these challenges? I just want to make sure it's clear to our listeners as you kind of shifted away and kind of led into the inclusion, social equity, and health pieces you're now focused on.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't say that smart cities is an end state.
Yep.
It is a component and a tool that can help improve the service and delivery that allows you to achieve these higher aims, right? Just like resilience or sustainability or, issues of equity and inclusion, for example, I always like to take each of those in the aspect of there is no end state. It is a process of continuous improvement. Right. And that the ability for you to achieve your aims is really how you start to create the chemistry to bring them all together in the right places, right? So in my opinion, you shouldn't have a project that's just an equity project or just a smart cities project or just sustainability or just resilience. You're really trying to find the way in which you can match and intertwine those all together. And that's like there's a lot of conversation these days about diversity, right? It's not just the racial and the gender component, which are essential, but it's also the diversity of thought and diversity of expertise, and the diversity of age. That, when you think about like your users and your user interface in a city, you have to be able to serve all of these different populations to build a city for all. And so that's one of the ways that we're trying to bring all these different puzzle pieces together in every project that we develop.
And you mentioned in this question we've kind of spent on that you produced two things from that Department of Transportation. You mentioned a climate report. You mentioned one PGH. Is one PGH kind of where you've put together that amassed amount of that vision? I mean, tell us about that.
Yeah, so one PGH is the city's first resilience strategy, and so that was a component, a strategy that we developed in 2015 to 2017, and it started with a really great piece of work called the Pittsburgh Preliminary Resilience Assessment, and so this we call it the PRA for short. But the resilience assessment effectively allowed us to look through this lens of shocks and stressors. So understanding the shocks as immediate potential negative impacts that the city can, will, and did experience.
Did it accurately predict your response to COVID?
It actually, all kidding aside, we actually did.
No, seriously. So, wow. So yeah. So tell us more about PRA, and then we'll come back to how it prepared you.
So like the PRA, it's an exercise that we went through, and we looked at all these things that could negatively affect the city in an immediate sense. That's a shock, right? Picture a hurricane, an earthquake, a fire, all these things that you see in the news, and you're like, oh man, that's tough. That's terrible. And then the other things you see in the news, what we call stressors, which are slow moving challenges that we as a society and humans endure. These are things that we know are a problem. We know that our infrastructure has a D rating by the American Society of Civil Engineers, but we still get out and we drive on the roads and cross the bridges and drink the water out of the pipes and everything. But we know it's not a C or a B or even an A, right? And so that's an example of a stressor. And so using that information, we compile that together to start to understand in the development of a strategy, how we as a city can use that lens and approach of shock and stressors to build our resilience. And so, for example, that led to the creation of our climate action plan. So one of the primary stressors that residents and folks in Pittsburgh identified was the issues of climate and the challenges that we face with climate change and the implications that they have both on city government, but also in terms of the city. We also developed one of our other primary stressors was the issues of inequity. And the mayor's administration created our Office of Equity and appointed a position of the Chief Equity Officer. So much like a Chief Resilience Officer person, somebody whose job it is to wake up every day and think about and act upon how we build equity in city government services, policies, and as well as kind of building equity across the society. And so it's these kind of examples that we've taken from that resilience strategy and put to work in the work that we do within city government.
And bring it back to how it prepared you for COVID. I mean, I'm assuming that was considered a shock. And how did you kind of use the playbook of the assessment to kind of prepare and act accordingly? I know I was in Jess. I kind of had a feeling it helped, but you were pretty definitive that it really prepared you in a great way.
Yeah, one of the things that we've seen with the creation of the resilience strategy and doing these plans, and everybody kind of poo-poos planning, right? Like, why are we doing? We don't need another plan on the shelf. Like, how many times have you heard that? The key is to make sure that you don't put the plan on the shelf, that you take it off the shelf periodically and read it and use it. And so what we've seen in the instances of COVID is that, effectively by creating an executive decision support tool, our team in the mayor's office and across city government knew early on that this is a challenge that we're facing. We also had a really great kind of EMS team and our public safety team who had already kind of had experience with SARS and prior kind of pandemics and kind of those types of issues of having their radar up. And so what we were able to do, and I think probably the most important thing because of the resilience strategy, was to think in an integrative way across the departments. So like the pandemic, not the pandemic that we're currently in, but pandemic was a potential shock that we identified, a risk factor, if you will, that we could experience as a local government. And so, the idea of kind of interagency department collaboration, who does what, when and where during events, these were all things that we came to understand through the strategy. The other thing that was really helpful for us as we were developing the plan, I mentioned the platform partnership program within the 100 Resilient Cities Initiative. We had done a number of tabletop exercises and scenario plannings on a variety of initiatives. So for example, we modeled a cyber attack on the city with our partners from Microsoft and used some of our IoT devices that we were deploying for energy efficiency as kind of the test beds. And so going through that tabletop scenario planning exercise had us many cases understanding, who to contact on the contact list, what's some of our security threats, and ultimately help build some of the muscle memory within our Department of Innovation and Performance that took the city of Pittsburgh, who didn't even have a work from home policy on March 1st, 2020, to a system that was able to effectively uproot 2,000 administrative workers and put them on a virtual work platform. So like these types of Herculean events they just don't happen overnight. And so building kind of that muscle memory, making those contacts were really essential. Similarly, we ran another scenario planning exercise with public health and public safety officials modeling an environmental event, an inversion, an air inversion. So where pollution gets trapped would have created a cardiopulmonary event, we called it. Those types of connections from that exercise helped to effectively show themselves during the pandemic. Our public safety officials were connected to public health officials and had built those relationships, so that type of networking and integrated thinking was really helpful, I think, for us in the early days of the pandemic, improving our response. Had we not had that, I mean, hindsight's always 2020, but I don't know that we would have been in as good a position as we were. So some of those threats were mitigated as a result of some of that work.
Wow. That's amazing, Grant. I want to kind of shift to kind of what you're doing today. But before we go on, because there was so much there, I think so much amazing advice for cities looking to develop kind of that capacity, that muscle memory, those relationships. So would you say that for a city that's looking to develop a resiliency program, that assessment was a critical first step that led you down that path? Was that kind of where you would suggest cities look to start?
Definitely. I mean, two things to say to that. One is that cities, when we plan, and this is, just the typical, I'd say 95, 99% of cities, when they do any planning, they do it with a sunny disposition in mind, right?
Yeah.
It is when you go through a planning activity, particularly within the community, you're asking questions like, how great would it be to put a park here? Or, what should housing look like? Or, what types of baskets should we put on Main Street? What types of flowers should go in the baskets? Those sorts of things. Resilience planning is a little bit different because you're taking it from a little bit of a darker place, because you're asking people, what happens when things go wrong? Or what happens when you don't address the problems that are underlying, right? So you look at the issues of social inequality that we've experienced during the pandemic, right? That, effectively, the pandemic stoked a burning ember of a fire that was already in place, right? And we've seen these inequalities laid bare throughout the pandemic. And they basically, anytime that you're in a shock event, these underlying stressors get amplified, right? Yep. And so, whether that's an issue of injustice or inequality, or if you have a crack in the bridge and all of a sudden you go through a massive freeze thaw cycle and the bridge starts to pull apart and the crack becomes a pothole and the pothole becomes a sinkhole, right? Like, the issue is that didn't happen overnight, that there was an underlying problem that existed that the shock event amplified. Yep. And so, to go through that exercise, I think, is important for any organization, to understand what are your potential shocks and stressors. This is different than a SWOT analysis, to be clear. This is really saying, like, these are places of vulnerability and these are places of risk, which I think is the second key component, is that many cities, well-managed ones do, but many cities do not, and local governments in general, have a risk management approach. And so as a result, asking yourself, what is the probability of some sort of cataclysmic failure of a system? We've seen this in Texas, right? No resilience, because they've optimized their self on the total opposite end of the spectrum to achieve, a price point for one end of economic benefit and value, but not looking at the whole spectrum has created cataclysmic loss. So, a lot of piece of kind of resilience strategy development and execution is, how do you balance out risk? Yep. And that's really kind of the thing that we're trying to develop with an urban systems management approach.
That's awesome. I mean, that's going to be some terrific advice for the listeners. So thanks for that. So let's now pivot to kind of some of the things you're working on, at least some things that I've been fascinated and wanting to pick your brain about for a while now. So can we chat about the Eco Innovation District programs?
Yeah.
Because I really think this is an example of how Pittsburgh has this unique approach at combining, on the one hand, the innovation, and then on the other hand, the resilience, sustainability efforts. I've heard a lot of cities speak to innovation districts, of which those cities have climate plans, some have sustainability plans, but I've never quite heard of the combination of the two in such a unique way. So talk to us about how it was established. And of course, what have been some of the outcomes or wins since they've been in existence?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't want to like pat myself on the back because a lot of people have made this happen. Just to be clear about that. But I think one of the interesting roles that I was able to play was that it's that idea of an integrator, right? Mm-hmm. And so I sit in a place where I was kind of one of the initiators to be one of the early project managers, where I was in a department called the Department of Innovation and Performance, which was a new initiative that Mayor Peduto helped establish. So I sat at the epicenter of being the sustainability person, but within a technology department, right? Mm-hmm. So really kind of at this nexus between the innovation economy and sustainability, and that with that lens, they are both integrated, right? So like sustainability is innovation, and innovation should also be sustainability. And so what a little bit of backstory on the Eco Innovation District was, for a long time, generation, the powers that be in the city of Pittsburgh were proposing the creation of a connection between the central business district, downtown Pittsburgh, and Oakland, which is our university and hospital corridor. And the community that sits in between that is a neighborhood called Uptown, which has never or hadn't seen any, formative kind of infrastructure or public investment for well over 40 years. And the proposal was first to put a light rail system, which was not financially feasible, but then that gravitated towards developing a bus rapid transit line. And the community was, I would say, ambivalent at best about the installation of what they viewed as a major piece of infrastructure that would be driven through the heart of their neighborhood. And a little bit of scene setting there is that we have a really great system of busways in Pittsburgh, which are dedicated bus lines and infrastructure, which are effectively highways that allow buses, it's a dedicated bus rapid transit system. And so people had that visually in their mind. And what we said was, let's take a step back, and that, the BRT could be a good thing if designed properly, but could be a horrible thing for the neighborhood if not designed properly. And so one of the recommendations that we received from the community during the mayor's transition team, or the mayor's transition process, was Pittsburgh should develop eco districts. And so one of the first things that I did when I started with the city was to investigate what the hell's an eco district.
Yeah, exactly.
And I come from a planning background and had, no idea. So like everyone, I did a quick Google search, and here, lo and behold, Christine Mondor, who runs a firm in Pittsburgh called Evolve EA, was like the local, we call it the local godmother of eco districts, and was connected me to the Eco Districts organization, which I ironically now serve on the board of. This is how these things kind of happen, right? And so we sit down with the leaders in Uptown, as well as our redevelopment authority, Sustainable Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, and we get together and we say, what do you guys think about this eco district process? And so, we walk through it, and eco districts has still a program called the Eco District Incubator. which a quick plug for them is really a great opportunity for cities to get together within this framework and learn the eco districts process and bounce ideas off of one another. And when we came out of the incubator, we had a team of 10, we went in as 10 individuals. We came out as a team.
Awesome.
And that concept of developing the Eco Innovation District was formulated at the Eco Districts Incubator. And so, with that in mind, what we were able to do is to leverage and advocate for what effectively is and has been the largest amount of neighborhood planning scale resources that the city of Pittsburgh has ever allocated, which is a critical point, is that you have to invest in planning. So quick plug there. But that ultimately led to the development of a consulting team and a 24-month really intensive neighborhood planning process. And that process allowed the community to build their voice and shape their vision. And what is coming out on the back of that vision is one, I think, a sense of direction for the community, but also a sense of stability for the marketplace. And so we were able to kind of create a new zoning code, which gives height bonuses for sustainability initiatives, a sense of kind of prioritization with infrastructure investment. So now we've also brought in $100 million for the bus rapid transit project. We've created a $70 million district heating plant. The University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is building the Vision Rehabilitation Hospital, so a $500 million investment. And at the same time, we're also building passive house designed affordable housing. So like all of those things are part of the part of the alchemy that is coming together because of that community plan. And, for kind of you guys in the smart city space, it's also a key component of our smart spines initiative that we build into our smart PGH strategy. So that bus rapid transit system is going to be electrified. It's going to be censored. Like all these sorts of things that we learn from smart PGH get applied into the delivery of that project now. So it's kind of these lessons learned from resilience, from smart cities to climate, all getting integrated into a district scale application.
Well, that's really what's smart, is when it's all comes together, right? It changes the trajectory of the city. And back to your point you said earlier, it puts the citizen at the center of what you're doing, and you're massing your know-how, you're integrating across units, you're bringing in technology. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, but Chris, I think that's a good point that you just brought up too. It's a lot of times I think cities think it has to be one or the other. We either do very citizen-centric, planning at the, exclusion of industry or, the investment community, or we focus on the investment community where, developers want to go and, kind of shut out the community. But here, through their, citizen-centric approach, they were able to create not only that sense of direction for the community that they can buy into themselves, but then to your point, stability, right, for the investment community. Okay, this is where this is going. This is where they want to go. We feel secure and comfortable to now go into that community, invest in it because it's what they want, right? And so I think that's a perfect example of how, you can have a citizen-centric approach to send out that demand signal for the investment community to come in and invest in your community. I thought that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things too that, one of the ahas, I remember being at a community meeting and one of the leaders of the uptown neighborhood, who was probably one of the biggest skeptics of the whole BRT process, and deservedly so. He had a moment where he's like, this type of investment can allow us to leverage the 10 other things that we want to see happen in the neighborhood. We have 90 neighborhoods that make up the city of Pittsburgh, which is a pretty dense, only 55 square miles. And not every neighborhood is going to have $150 million transportation infrastructure project, right? And so how you leverage that is, a critical piece, I think, in terms of building community. Because you're right, Dom, it's not, sometimes we go many times, actually, I think we go too far in one direction, where you're doing too much on the community engagement and not enough on the industry side, or too much on the industry side and not enough on the community side. And as a result, what you get is you get people that get a bad taste in their mouth for one or the other, right? Versus having kind of a cohesive, inclusive process that recognizes everyone as a stakeholder, and then everybody kind of brings their best dish to the dinner.
Totally.
How about in a broader level than kind of resiliency and SMART? Is there anything you want to highlight City of Pittsburgh's doing, or near and dear to my heart? I know you have some great universities near you. Is there anything you want to talk about partnerships with them that our audience should understand that the City of Pittsburgh's doing?
Yeah, I would say, there's a lot in there, Chris. One of the big resources that we do have, and I think, any city that has a college or a university can do this, whether it's within their boundaries or, within close proximity, because what that brings is a level of curiosity and learning. I think just having kind of those institutions is helpful, but also they become a tool that those of us in local government don't have, which is, Phoenix may be different. I don't know, but like, we don't have a research and development department up on the 8th floor, like we don't have an R&D budget, right? And so what we've done really well with University of Pittsburgh and Duquesne University and Carnegie Mellon and Chatham, and kind of the whole ecosystem, some of the smaller colleges like Washington and Jefferson College and Robert Morris University in Pittsburgh, Point Park. We have a lot. We're a college town, not like an Ann Arbor or a Columbus or a State College. Like, we don't get kind of pegged as that, but we are a college town in many regards. And so what we've been really good at, I think, is leveraging the student population and kind of their interests, whether that's through internships or student projects or getting classes engaged on these topics and really kind of sparking their ingenuity. Or it's been working with professors and building out kind of the research and development applications, or using the physical capital budgets of the universities to help develop these projects. So like the Eco Innovation District, for example, Duquesne University sits at the epicenter of the Eco Innovation District. So they are one of our critical partners who don't really get heralded as much as the University of Pittsburgh or Carnegie Mellon, but they're making major infrastructure decisions that are helping to leverage the Eco District project. With the University of Pittsburgh, one of the key things that we've been partnered with them on, two things. One has been really thinking big. It's good for us in thinking big, whether it's through the reinvestment in our water and sewer infrastructure, and the coordination with what's called the Institute of Politics at the University of Pittsburgh, or more recently, we co-developed a project with the Catt School of Business at Pitt, and the University Center for Sustainable Business, called the Marshall Plan for Middle America, which is a research report that I helped to co-author that shows the investment needs for the clean energy transition throughout the Ohio Valley, or targeted investment and programmatic decisions that we're making with Carnegie Mellon, where we've created the Traffic 21 program and the Metro Lab and Metro 21 program. And this is where, those researchers at Carnegie Mellon are toying with an idea or a concept, and we're scratching our head at something, and we come together and say, hey, let's put some cameras on some public works vehicles and take pictures of potholes, and let's develop some algorithms around that. Or my favorite example is my friend Aziz at the School of Architecture at Carnegie Mellon comes up to me. He's like, Grant, I could put sensors on all of your energy equipment and give you interval data at like every 15 minutes. And I'm like, that's amazing. And then I leave and I'm like, what am I going to do with all that data? And so I go back to Aziz and I say, Aziz, what are we going to do with all this? He's like, oh, we got to figure it out. So like, it's that type of give and take that's like really exciting about where we're at, because we have partners who are investing, both their blood, sweat, tears, and toils, but also their capital resources to kind of help rebuild and reinvest in the city.
I love that. I think that's a great example. But again, I think it goes to your point about, you as this integrator, you as this person, because a lot of times, a researcher, an academic comes to a city and they don't speak the same language. You need that person that's open to say, yeah, let's do it. I don't really know what he was talking about, but we'll figure it out, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have another program called PGH Labs, which has also been helpful just to that point. Like, it's small scale startup organizations. Many times, it's been a professor who has an idea and they don't have money. They don't have a venture fund. Kleiner Perkins hasn't called them yet. And like, they need to deploy sensors somewhere, and so we've been really good through the PGH Lab program to do things like that, because there's a quid pro quo. Like, on the other end of that, we're getting a data point, whether that's a faculty researcher or a student-led project. Like, we've done some really great stuff with Duquesne's SMBA program that has literally transformed our fleet and helped us build an energy benchmarking and transparency policy for commercial buildings. Not having kind of the students and those professors, it helps serve as it would be an impediment for us. Instead, they've served as an accelerant for a lot of the work that we do.
That's awesome. That's great.
Well, we have to honor you in your time. I know you said you had an hour. We're coming up close to that. We have a couple last questions we ask all our guests, but we'll have to get you back. Hopefully not in the middle of a pandemic, to prove the value of resiliency, to let you keep the creative juices flowing and tell us about some of these new things on the horizon. It's really exciting to talk to you. Is there anyone that you want to call out that's helped you in your journey that you want to give some appreciation to? I know for Dom and I, and as an integrator, you can't do it on your own. So anything that
just supposed to like thank my mom and dad, or
all the way back.
I want to thank the academy.
More like we've had a lot of people that just they feel like they get a break along the way, and it kind of changes their course and brings them to where they're at. I have a funny feeling, if you think about it from that lens, there's definitely a person or two.
Yeah, there's so many people. I would say, a couple of things that are really working for me. Tons of mentors that have helped me along the way. But one of the things just in this smart city journey, I would say you can't underscore, and this is going to, sound a bit like a suck up, but like, we've had really good leadership in the city. So, obviously like Mayor Peduto is super helpful. And we've had a leadership team, with our first director of innovation performance, Deb Lamb, Kevin Acklin, who was our first chief of staff, and now Dan Gilman. Like, one of the things that's been really great, and I've tried to apply these lessons from them, whether they're intentional or not lessons, is like just to give people space. And so like we have, the green light in Pittsburgh is about sustainability, but it's also about go. And so we've had this culture of innovation where, like, no matter how crazy the idea is, let's give it a shot. And let's bring the resources, because we don't have a lot. Like, it's not like we're sitting on mounds of cash, or like I said, like an R&D team up on the 8th floor. We have to be scrappy to make these things happen. And so our leadership team has been really important, I think, in making, helping to provide a runway for people like myself, and making those things happen. But then the other piece is, like, we have a really good team. And so, like, I have a staff that is just, really good at developing data. So I taught a class the other night at the University of Pittsburgh, and they were asking, like, what are some of the things that we should be preparing for? And I was like, I've made 5 hires. I started as a team of 2, myself and one other person. And in every one of those people that we've brought on board, they've had strong data and analytic capabilities, because one of the things that we're seeing in government right now is we've gone from, or are going from, a data desert to a data oasis. And so the ability to develop, because many times the data is not there, develop data, collect it, analyze it, disseminate it, and turn it into a decision support tool is really critical. And my team's been, fabulous at that. Like I have the idea, they push back and then they massage it and then they come up with some really good stuff. And so, the leadership and then building a team of like the people around you really helps to kind of shape this stuff. And then I also have a good network of peers, of other managers within the city of Pittsburgh who are taking that same mindset of, I don't have $1 billion budget, let alone $1 million budget to sit on. We're going to have to problem solve, and we're going to have to find new ways to kind of leverage it. And, all of our department leaders are doing the same thing.
That's great. I'm sure your parents are still happy. It's funny. You're the second guest that's appreciated Deb Lamb. So that's actually really cool because she's going to be a guest in a couple months. We've got her in May, I think. But to that point, is there anyone you look up to the industry as you've kind of learned a little bit about the urban complex that you think we should have on the show that's not Deb? Because we've already got her.
You already got Deb booked. Yeah, you already got Deb booked. Deb's terrific. She is, she's a terrific manager and a visionary, and I just really enjoyed the time that we had working together. There's a lot of interesting people. I'll spit a couple names out at you. Somebody who's really fabulous in this space is Peter Terrellis from Siemens. Siemens has like a really great team. Peter is somebody that, he's like an integrator within Siemens. So he knows just much about, the urban energy ecosystem as he does Siemens healthcare. And so, weird, Yeah. But that's like the point of an integrator, is that you're able to kind of see across the horizon and understand, what's coming, or who to drive to. So Peter's somebody is definitely I look to, inside of our 100 Resilient Cities Network, like you guys mentioned, your connection with Jason Whitted, but people like Michael Berkowitz and Andrew Salkin, and kind of the work that they've done within 100 Resilient Cities is really, really terrific for cities, in terms of, what Judith Roden, when she was at the Rockefeller Foundation, and then followed up with Rod Shaw is there now, like understanding the role of cities in terms of how we are positioned and required to deliver on the challenges of our time. Yep. And so, understanding the impact on carbon emissions or risk finance or smart cities and all these sorts of things that, like, you guys are talking about on your show. And that's what's really fascinating, I think, about cities today. I was just talking to a company, Arrival is the name of the company. They're a UK, yep. They're effectively an EV van and bus platform, right? And so they've hired a city strategist.
Yeah.
Which I was like, I'm just as interested in talking to you as you are to me, because the fact that a company is thinking about hiring a person in that role, they're not an app developer, they're not an electrical engineer. They're fundamentally trying to think about how their product gets deployed in the city. Exactly. And what that means. So, those are some folks that I think are pretty interesting. Also the Bloomberg Network is, one of the things that I was talking with my colleague Lauren in Los Angeles. We were on a panel the other day, and one of the things that was really fascinating, we were just talking about how networks are, city to city networks are these huge accelerators. Mm-hmm. Because we're learning from one another, and you guys are seeing this, I'm sure, in your work in Arizona too, is like the fact that you get Tucson and Scottsdale and Phoenix in the room, and everybody's dealing with like same or similar challenges and learning from one another. It's not so much competitive as it helps make us better, learn from each other's mistakes, apply each other's successes. Those things are really important.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I mean, that's, Grant, ultimately the goal of this podcast was, man, we need to get out there and just tell these stories because, we get to meet each other through like cohorts or at conferences, and we get to share our stories together. But a lot of times the rest of the world, the rest of the cities, even industry doesn't get to hear these stories. So we just want to share these stories so we can all learn and we can all kind of accelerate that impact in our community. So this has been a lot of fun, Grant. We
awesome.
Feel like we could talk for another 2 hours, but we'll get you out of here. We really appreciate you taking the time joining us today. This has been great. We look forward to having you back on the show and learning some more about what you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And maybe next time we can do it in studio and in Arizona there, so I can come visit you guys.
Yep.
Sounds good. Nice to meet you, Grant.
It's likewise 80 degrees here today, so we'd love to have you out.
I just won't come in August. That's
the dry heat.
Yeah.
The dry heat. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Grant. We appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys. We'll talk soon. Be well. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Great. Wow. See, I told you love Grant, don't you?
Yeah. He knows the stuff for sure. Yeah.
So
So he got going, and he started with a couple of things, and obviously near and dear to my world of higher education. People don't really realize Pittsburgh is another mecca of higher education. He listed off well-known schools and some smaller schools. I think that's an important thing to think about. And so, if any of our listeners here are trying to partner and do big things, they don't have the research departments. They may not have the expertise, but a lot of times these groups want to partner and they want to think bigger and they want to tackle things collaboratively, and their students want to get involved. Maybe hire them on as mentors, or maybe the research department brings them on as part of their research work and their PhD studies. Like, there's all sorts of things they can lead to. So I do think that's one of our secret sauces here in the Phoenix Metro with Arizona State and so many others. And I think you can clearly see that Grant and City of Pittsburgh are doing the same with their higher education ecosystem. But the other thing that was really cool was that just the way he told the story of the U.S. Department of Transportation, that was kind of the catalyst of a lot of the work that they did via the Smart City Challenges. And what was interesting to me is how they started with this external challenge, but then as they dug in, they realized it was layered upon layered upon layered of elements and deeper tech. Started with tech, and then it got into specifics of what can be done with mobility and the energy systems and the ICT systems. And his point was it's just additive. And I think that leads in to his type of approach of bringing together all sorts of expertise and inclusion in the process, and really citizens at the forefront. But that thinking big and starting small and then adding the layers on, I thought was really important.
Totally. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that's one of those examples of, that challenge that you spoke of that led them down this path. They didn't win the DOT grant, but, we didn't get a chance to ask him. I bet he would agree that just going through that process was so beneficial because it's led them to where they are today. So even though they didn't
Kickstarter, right? It brought them together to get to try to tackle something different, and look where it's led.
So I mean, sometimes those federal grants, even though you might not have a real great chance of winning, doesn't mean you shouldn't just go through the process, shouldn't do it, right? It's just starting. I forgot what guess it was, but just starting is a better, answer than not starting at all.
And don't forget that sometimes partnering with back to the higher education, their research departments are experts in responding to grants too. Sometimes coming together with them in your approach might lead to even bigger things too. And good point about just starting. Who was that? Trying to think.
We'll have to pull it up. Any of the guests or any of our audience can help us on that one. But you're right. But again, I think that goes, back to Emily Yates of last week was, I think you mentioned it 5, 6, 8 times, this integrator role, right? You need someone that can be this integrator, that can work internally, understands the systems of local government, the pressures of local government, the processes of local government, and can have those conversations between departments, but then can also twist the hat and go external and talk to the Microsofts, the Carnegie Mellons of the world, right? And speak their language and put themselves in their shoes and understand, what is in it for them and how can we get them to the table so that way we can all collaborate, we can all benefit, and we can develop those win-win-win partnerships that are so critical in this space. I want to keep reiterating to our audience the fact that when you're looking to hire a smart city manager, a smart city director, a chief resilience officer, the social skills, the integrator role is critical.
In the collaboration. It was funny. It made intuitive sense when at the end he was recognizing the cohort that you all, or when you did the intro, when you recognized that with Jesse bringing folks together, because I was like, he sounds a lot like Emily Yates in his integrator role, his systems approach. It's like they're printing out this kind of this mindset. So that's great.
So great advice for the city managers of the world looking to kickstart their smart city program. Hire an integrator.
Yeah.
One thing maybe the last thing I just want to touch on. There was so much great information. I'm going to look forward to really going back and kind of digesting this interview a little bit more. But this idea of starting with this resilience assessments. I can't remember the official point, and how critical it was to put the city through this process of looking at shocks and stressors. And I thought the juxtaposition and the difference between the two and how cities respond to the two are phenomenal in and of itself. But the fact that they put themselves through this process and the capability that it developed, the relationships that it developed, the capacity that it developed by just going through the process, not only understanding where they're vulnerable, but developing the internal capacity to respond now that they went through the process for things like COVID is incredible. And so I know a lot of the cities that I at least speak to are trying to wrap their minds around, okay, we want to develop resiliency, but where do we get started? Do I have to hire someone? Do I need to do an assessment? Do I just hire a consultant to do a plan for me? Where do we start? And maybe this idea of, an assessment, looking at shocks, looking at stressors is the perfect place to begin. I thought that was incredible advice for cities, because every city is thinking about this right now. And I love the comment about, when cities do planning, he's so right. We love to think about the rosy outlook. What kind of plants should we put in our bouquet in downtown? If you had $1 million, I love that's a typical question for us cities, right? It's, if you had no budget or unlimited budget, what would you spend it on? It's like, yeah, those are great situations to be in. But how many times do we actually find ourselves in those positions? It's a totally different mindset to actually think about if, a pandemic hit, or if an airborne, pathogen hit, or, what he mentioned.
Let's hope we do get a breather on this. We get back to a little sense of normalcy. But yeah, he just really showed how getting people together in a collaborative way, you're ready for anything. I know we saw that at Arizona State University. I know you saw that with the groups you worked with at the state. And lesson: be prepared. Planning's great. Be part of it. So,
but take it off the shelf.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. Take it off the shelf and use it. So, in the spirit of cracks in the pavement, I'm curious if you have any ideas. But it was interesting how he was talking about the stressors of his assessment process, and got me a little nervous when he was talking about bridges. Let's hope there's no major cracks in that infrastructure. But anything come to mind when you think cracks in the pavement for this episode?
Yeah, we'd love to just highlight one, here locally with a big win that we celebrated last week with the opening of Electromechanica's manufacturing facility. Well, they're going to open a manufacturing facility here in Mesa, Arizona. It was a big win for us, going to bring a lot of jobs. But what's also very interesting is through the process of recruiting them, we leveraged the Smart Region framework to really say, hey, not only do we want you to open a manufacturing facility here, we want to work with you to develop a micro-mobility project. Bring the cities together. Let's look at how do we leverage your vehicles in a micro-mobility electric vehicle project here. So I think it was a good 1-2 punch of bringing in a manufacturing facility, leveraging our network, our platform around the Smart Region to actually help not only bring the manufacturing facility here, but then leverage it to help solve some of the micro-mobility electric vehicle challenges that we're facing in Greater Phoenix and the state of Arizona. And what I love about it too is, who would have known here in the desert, sunny, dry Arizona, we're now becoming this proving grounds, this this home for electric vehicles and the future of electric transportation. What I like to say is we're turning the desert green here. We're becoming the oasis, as Grant mentioned, right? It's
data desert becoming the data oasis, and you're making the desert green, huh? Nice.
Yeah, it's exciting to see. No one would think these sorts of technology would flourish, in a desert, in this kind of environment. But it just goes to show you, in today's age, you collaborate, you work together, you can pivot, right, and you can really help drive future economies, that you think can best help support cities and make an impact. So it
sounds like a future U.S. Department of Transportation Smart City Challenge response to win some money with them. And yeah, it was interesting when the news came out. There was a subsidiary news about how the ecosystem is what drew them here, and it's being observed. And those types of things, when you create the sandboxes, when you think big but you start small, and you allow people to try things, but you allow people to share what's working, and you get more people involved, it just compounds each other. And it's kind of like the Amazon flywheel of sorts. It just keeps building and reiterating, and it's a great story.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to becoming like the future proving grounds for new energy, electrified transportation right here. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Right on. Well, that's a wrap. Until next time. See y'all.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Urban Complex. Smarter cities for a stronger tomorrow. Please find us on where you listen: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. We do love your feedback. Let us know if you have ideas for guests or questions to air on Cracks in the Pavement via social media. The Urban Complex is found on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Or just shoot me an email, chris@theurbancomplex.com. Till next time.